بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمد ونصلي على رسول الكريم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Alhamdulillah, we praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ask him send peace and blessings on his beloved and our beloved Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So we're in the middle of the chapter. For those who've not, because everything was online for the last few months, so the recordings are there. The chapter was about what is narrated regarding the dead hearing the speech of the living, and then they're knowing what they've been asked and who is visiting them, and they're knowing the condition after death of the living, and they know the condition of their relatives in the dunya, their condition. They have news or information about that. And there was a discussion. The main hadith, of course, is the hadith in Bukhari of when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam he addressed the dead of the Quraysh, the leaders of the Quraysh who fought against the Muslims that were killed, and the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam addressed them, and the Sahaba were perplexed that you're talking to their dead and you're speaking to them, addressing them. And then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, no, they hear more, and there's a discussion, there's a difference of opinion even at the level of Sahaba radiallahu anhu. This is an academic difference, but the majority view of the scholars from Sahaba radiallahu anhu and onwards is that the dead can hear the living and so forth. There are some people in history have made this into sectarian issue. Like, you can take any issue and make it into a fight. Where you put your hands in salat, you can make it into a fight. There are people who made it into a fight. There are other people who do the opposite or different, and they stand next to each other, they don't even notice. One learned from one sheikh this way, one learned from this sheikh this way, and there's academic differences, and then the practices are different. But you can make how you move your finger in salat. As one sheikh came from Jordan, he said, what about a person who doesn't have a finger? Then what happens? So everybody's happy with him, because we can't see. So this is so academic differences exist even in matters of belief as well. Not the core beliefs, fundamentals, beliefs of Tawheed, or belief in Akhirah, or belief in prophethood, Risala. There's no ikhtilaf on these things. These are core, these are qat'i, these are absolute, they're not speculative. But there are many things that are dhanni, that are speculative. They're up for discussion. Right? And Imams differ on these. But if you look at the adab of the Imams, they can disagree on such issues. And so there's a discussion that I went through in the last session, which I'll not go through again, just to recap, that like Sayyidina Aisha radiallahu anha had a different view from the other Sahaba, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he addressed them, this is a khususiyah, specific specialty of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's like a miracle of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that he can talk to the dead. But this was not the view of the general body of Sahaba. She radiallahu anha had this view, and she's not someone small. They say 1/3 of deen came to our mother Sayyidina Aisha radiallahu anha. They came through her. So she's not a lightweight in terms of knowledge. She's one of the great mufti and alim of this ummah, and taught deen to us, and the mother of the believers. So, but the jamhur, the general body of Sahaba radiallahu anhum, they held another view. So, but it's not, they both accept azab al-qabr. The fundamentals are the same, but there's an academic difference there. And sometimes in the difference, one group or one person can use stronger words regards the other and so forth. And these are taken, people that put their heart and mind into an idea or a thought or a study, then of course they will defend it, they will argue it sometimes strongly, and they'll disagree sometimes strongly as well. The problem is that when you bring it into the community, into the masjid, just mentioning this, that there's a difference between academic differences. Even if you feel strongly, use strong words for it, is one thing. But when you bring it into the masjid and you make fights over it. Alright, as an incident mentioned about one sheikh, I believe he's in Egypt. I think it was Hassan al-Banna, if I'm correct. That, because the iqama according to the Hanafi is longer, and according to the Shafi'i is shorter. And the different riwayat are there, and it's an academic difference. So some argument started in the masjid regarding should do longer, should do shorter. And so he said that to leave the iqamah, we'll pray without the iqamah. Because the iqamah is sunnah. According to majority scholars, sunnah. It's not part of the salat, it's a It's pre-salat, right? Some say it's sunnah al-kifaya, it's fard al-kifaya. But to fight is haram. So then we'll leave the haram thing because we're fighting in the mosque. So academic differences can happen, but the problem is when you make the academic differences to sectarian fight, so forth. And this is and on this issue, I'm mentioning these things, that academic differences is normal. It's a normal thing in Islam, not just on fiqh. In aqidah matter, this is aqidah matter, right? What is in death, but the core idea is the same. But there is some little bit of difference among the scholars, and they're discussing in books. But the problem is when you pull it out of the book, and then you start calling the other one this and the other one that, and make it more than what it is. And this has caused a lot of. I mean, I don't need to explain to you. I don't know in your countries, but I can give you the case of Pakistan. This is like way out of. It's gone in certain circles. It's gone way out of hand. I mean, and then the ultimate, of course, ends up in takfir. This is the worst form of it, and it's the wrong place to. In Melbourne, I remember one of the ulama in Melbourne, he teaches Quran to kids. He's a perfectly normal alim, but I was in a house somewhere. He said, that he does shirk in khutbah. Someone said about him. I won't mention the names. Said about another alim that he does shirk in khutbah. I mean, that accusation is so serious, and he's not talking about like anybody. Like, he's talking about a guy who spends day and night teaching Quran. That kids in Melbourne have become hufaz because with him. I don't know what he heard in the khutbah, what he think he heard, but I can vouch for him that he's not a mushrik. He's not done shirk. From the whatever I know of him, like it's such an extreme level. Like, people can take things to such an extreme level. Whatever he said in the khutbah, but I don't think it was shirk. Or however this guy understood it, but just says it like that, like a matter of fact. This person's committed shirk. So we have to be careful. And so here there's example of this. I'm just starting this discussion, this end discussion of this chapter, that there's academic differences is perfectly normal, right? And it should not be seen as something like this is a flaw in deen. Allah has left certain things to us to figure out, to use our brain in. Mutashabihat is in the Quran, right? There are ayat in the Quran that are difficult to read. And one of the Qurra from Egypt, he mentioned, what is it there for? It's to keep the Hafiz alert. He has to concentrate. There's ayat that are very similar. And the ulama write little booklets and charts and trying to help the Hafiz that he doesn't mix up. But even someone like Abdul Basit Abu Samad, he sometimes get caught, rarely, but someone, Rahimahulla, that he got caught. So these are there to keep the Hafiz on his toes, to keep alert. And so Allah's left certain things for us to try to study and understand. Hence, in trying to understand it, not in the core things, but in certain subsidiary masail, or there are discussions, and ulama can disagree and have difference of opinion, and but then it should not be taken beyond the limit. So I'm continuing from a previous discussion. قال أبو صالح وغيره من السلف في قوله تعالى بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم كيف تكفرون بالله وكنتم أمواتا فأحياكم ثم يميتكم ثم يحييكم ثم إليه ترجعون فدل على أن الحياة الأولى في القبر للسؤال وإن كان أكثرون خالفوا في ذلك. So in this discussion, there's some of the early Muslims that they had the view of this ayat. How can the translation of the verse is, how do you disbelieve in Allah and you are dead? So first thing comes is that you are dead. Then he said, then Allah gave you life, then he gave you death, then he gave you life again, and to him is a return. So death is mentioned first, then life. So they said that the first life, when do you die first? When are you dead first? What's the first death? This is the view that you've not. If you didn't know that, when is your first death? You would consider this your first life, and then you died, right? So then the first death, because it's mentioned in order. So there was some of the early Muslims had the view that the first death The death is because it means death, then life. Now we understand that because there's a hadith and there's understanding the ulama have explained to us, right, which is the majority view, which is that the death is what you said, which is the you're creating something that was not alive, then were given life in this world, then death, all right, and then you're given a life again, which is life of the hereafter. This is what generally is understood. But there were some that they viewed this first death as a death that when you die at the end of this life, then you're given life, then you're given death, then you're given life again. So this is their view, and all of the Salaf had the view. So you see, there's even in that there's the ayat of Quran. It's ayat of Quran. We say the ayat of Quran is it is. This is what it means. But then there's a discussion within it, and some Imam. And it's not that they're trying to be different for the sake of being different. They really believe this. This is after their research, not on just like their fancy or like their mood or whatever they felt like. They did tahqiq and research because they're qualified for it, and after they formed a view which differed. And this is the honesty of research, is where a person, not to disagree for the sake of disagreeing, but when they put all their proofs and so forth together and understanding, they came to a conclusion which is different. And this is something praiseworthy in Islam. This is not something that is criticized. This is praiseworthy if they're qualified to do it. Problem is when you get unqualified mujtahids, unqualified scholars or non-scholars, and they try it without any proof, without any research, without understanding the Arabic language, they come to conclusion which is not to be regarded, right? Whose conclusion to be regarded after proper research, and the research that is acceptable of a standard. That's why, like in universities, they have today peer review. Like meaning that the people of that field, they will look at it and critique it and say this is acceptable. This is okay. This is an acceptable level of research. So people in ilm, the same thing is there. We know who's who and where they studied and who they studied from, and what their levels are in terms of their knowledge and so forth. The ulama body, scholarly body, they know who's who, who's in and who's out. And so the early Muslims, they do believe, and they've made it very clear that the soul returns. This is one of the other discussions, that the soul returns to the body when the questions are asked. And this is he says, Tawaif min fuqaha mutakallimin. So the aqidah scholars, the jurists, the fuqaha, min ashabina, he said, Ibn Rajab Al-Hanbali, this is his book. So he's saying from our ashab, our companions or our ulama authorities, meaning the Hanbali scholars, because he was a Ibn Rajab Al-Hanbali, he was a Hanbali Imam, one of the 4 schools of the Ahlul Sunnah. And so he said from among our scholars, but he said there were others that who had an opposite view. So for example, Ibn Hazm Rahimahulla and others, that this questioning is al-su'alu li-ruhi khassa. The questioning in the qabr is only for the soul. And also when the address is made to them, when they hear, if an address is made to them, like the address of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it's only to the soul. And they denied that the soul returns to the body in the grave for punishment or other than that. And because of this ayat above, because this means that they would have to die 3 times. This is their logic, and they would have to live 3 times. And the Quran only tells you that they died twice and were alive twice. وَهَذَا ضَعِيفٌ جِدًّا. Ibn Rajab passed a judgment, but this view is academically very weak. Not the riwayah, the narration. This view is actually very weak. Because he said, indeed, the life of the ruh, it's not a complete life. Like the life of this dunya, and the life in itself, the life of the soul is not a real life, or not a complete life. Not like the life of this dunya, and not like the life of the akhirah, after resurrection. It has a connection with the body. The ruh has a connection with the body, and then the body can experience certain things from enjoyment and from punishment, but it's not a complete life. When it is devoid or disconnected, better word probably infisal, separated or disconnected from the body. It's like when a person is asleep and the soul separates. So the life of sleeping is not a real, it's not a complete life. Alhamdulillah alladhi ahyana ba'da ma matana wa ilayhi nushur. that the dua is that it is a type of all praise is due to Allah, that He gave us a life after death. This is a dua for sleeping. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran refers that He gives death to a person when he sleeps. Allah yatawaffa al-anfusa hina mawtiha wallati lam tamut fi manamiha. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions about the soul, that He takes the soul of a person, and then when some people go to sleep, then Allah takes some of them with their life, some Allah allows to come back. The ruh doesn't come back for some people when they go to sleep, and with some people it comes back and then they continue life, and whenever Allah wishes He takes their life. From among the scholars, from our scholars, so from the Hanbali school, like within one school is not like it's a monolithic that all have the same view. So big Imams like Ibn Aqil. Now Ibn Aqil, if you from the Hanbalis, he wrote the largest book in history, 1,000 volumes. Who's got the time to read? He wrote it, Al-Funun, on everything, medicine, fiqh, everything and anything and everything. I don't think the whole book survived. As far as I know, I think sections of it survived. So I mean, people were ambitious. They worked hard. I mean, this is like dipping into ink and writing it on paper, dipping into ink. Not imagine if they had a computer and a typewriter and what they would have produced today. And Ibn Jawzi rahmatullah alayh, they held this view that the punished na'im and adab in some of his writings, Ibn Rajab say that in their writings you see that they indicated that the na'im and adab is for li ruh khasa. It's specific exclusively for the soul. The punishment and reward is only for the soul. And Ibn Aqil, he gives the view, he said, because as a hadith mentions that the souls of the believers are put into the green birds. As we know, this famous hadith, shuhada, the believers, their souls are put into green birds. And the souls of the kuffar are put in black birds. And the bodies, they become, they crumble and they decay in the grave. And so, but he said that this doesn't وَهَذَا لَا حُجَّ فِي لِأَنَّهُ لَا يُنَافِي اتصال الروح. But this argument, Ibn Rajab explains at the end, concludes, it doesn't negate the connection between the body. And then he goes, they give further proofs. He's giving their proofs. He said, they say that that Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu entered the masjid, al-Haram. وَإِبْنُ زُبَيْرَ قَدْ قُتِلَ. So Ibn Zubayr radiallahu, Abdullah bin Zubayr radiallahu, he fought against, he claimed Khilafah, and then it's a long story. And then he eventually, Makkah Mukarram was retaken, and Hajjaj bin Yusuf, he was the general that was sent to attack him, and he hung his body up after Abdullah bin Umar radiallahu anhu, Umar bin Khattab, Abdullah bin Zubayr bin Umar, and he's a Sahabi himself. He's the fourth generation Sahaba. This is Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu's family. So Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he was Sahabi. His father Abu Quhafa, he accepted at Fath Makkah Islam. He's Sahabi. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu's children, sons and daughters, they're Sahaba radiallahu anhu, meaning they're with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. From his daughter is Asma bint Abu Bakr. Her son was Abdullah bin Zubayr, who was a child when Rasulullah passed away, but he was a Sahabi. So it's the only family among the Sahaba the fourth generation of Sahaba in one family. Then obviously it's Abu Bakr Siddiq, so Allah gave him that honor. So when Ibn Zubayr radiallahu anhu, he was killed, and his body was hung up in the Haram. So Asma bint Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, she came. She was nearly 100 years old. Abdullah bin Umar radiallahu anhu said, "Isbiri fa inna hadhihi juthata laysat bishay." So Abdullah bin Umar radiallahu anhu said something to her. This is a proof for that group of ulama who don't believe that the body is nothing, right? It's really the soul that is receiving the reward and punishment. He said, be patient, because this body doesn't mean it's nothing. Like basic. I'm translating. Correct me if I'm translating. Arabs are here, so they can correct me. This body, it's just a body, a shell, and this isn't anything. This is Abdullah bin Umar giving her advice. وَإِنَّمَا الْأَرْوَاحُ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ. Only the souls are with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And she said that she also, she فقالت, nothing prevents me from sabr because it was Uhdiya Ra'su Yahya bin Zakaria ila Baghi min Baghaya bin Israel. She said that. And she, because she was also Sahabiya, senior Sahabiya, radiallahu anha, she understood as well. He goes, yes, because Yahya bin Zakaria, Yahya alayhi salam, son of Zakaria alayhi salam, prophets. His head was, if you know the story, his head, he was decapitated, presented to a woman who demanded his head, right? There's a long incident behind this. Why? There's one riwayah that the king wanted to marry, or the person wanted to marry a mahram, like a lady that you cannot marry, like a niece or something. I think it was a niece he wanted to marry. And the other riwayah is that she was a one of the prostitutes, and to offer herself to the king, then the price was that to bring Yahya. So there's different opinion. What the end conclusion is the same, which is that Yahya alayhi salam was killed, was shaheed by them. But if this can happen to a prophet, if such a trial can get to a prophet, then she also had this. She herself mentioned, and it mentioned another narration, an argument of the above group, that when Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, he was passing by some graves, and because these are just bodies. وَإِنَّمَا الْأَرْوَاحُ وَالَّتِي تُعَاقَبُ وَتُثَابُ إِلَى يَوْمِ الْقِيَامَةِ. Because it's the souls that will receive the reward and punishment. And Ibn Rajab, Rahimahullah, he's giving their arguments, all the proofs possibly can support their arguments. And he gives another view when one of the armies, Amr ibn As, radiallahu anhu, so his brother, he was at the front, he was killed, and so then what happened was, because his body was there, the army was trying to go. Hisham bin As, Amr ibn As, his brother, so they were trying to not step, they were avoiding the body, they were in battle, so then he ordered, because Amr ibn As, he was the commander, Zamir, إن الله قد استشهد ورفع روحه إنما هو جثة فأوطئوا الخيل. So this is not an easy thing to say. He said, he becomes shaheed, and Allah has lifted his ruh. Then ride your horses, like you have to ride over him, because now it's affecting. Because if you're trying to dodge him, the body, this is just a body now, a shell. So this is another argument. These are arguments for this group, this minority group, to have this view regarding. And he said they rode over until it was totally, like the body was like gone. It said that, I heard this, but I can't remember. It's not mentioned here, that Amr ibn As, at the end of it, he collected his brother, whatever's left of his brother, after the army had gone. But he would not affect the operations of that army. All of these incidents indicate وَهَذِهِ الْآثَارِ لَا تَدُلُّ عَلَى أَرْوَاحِ الَّتِي تَسْبِلُ الْأَبْدَانِ. Because none of these indications, he's saying, he mentioned all the riwayah, and then he passes a judgment as the great research scholar that Ibn Rajab is, that he said none of these indicate that the soul is not connected to the body after death. Right? What it indicates is that the bodies may not be harmed from the azab of this dunya. And this وَإِنَّمَا هُوَ النَّوْمُ الْآخِرِ يَسْوِ إِلَىٰ. So this is like a specific exception that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not the norm. So it is possible that a person, the general rule is that the body does experience pain and na'im, enjoyment, right? But these incidents don't tell, these are exceptions to the rule. He's saying that this doesn't say that it's not, they don't negate the fact that the body does not experience any pain. So Allahu Alam. And this is the Ibn Rajab is arguing the main group of scholars and their view. And then he mentions الأرواح عند الله تعالى تعاقب وتثاب لا ينافي لا تصل بدنا أحيانا فذلك نجس النعيم وعذاب قد تستقل روحيا النعيم والعذاب إنه عند الاستحال الجسد وقبل ذلك. So there's an argument like, as long as the body is there and the body still exists, then does it experience the pain? Does it experience the bounty? Does it experience the azab, torment, azab? So their argument is this, and he said that, and he continues with their argument. However, he goes, the other group of scholars, there is a group of scholars that actually deny totally. They say that the reward and punishment is only for the body, right? It's got nothing to do with the ruh. The ruh is totally separate. And Ibn Aqil is one of the Ibn Zaghuni, and others have mentioned similar sort of sayings in their books. He said the apparent words of Imam Ahmad Rahimahullah is, and is the riwayah of Hanbal, the souls of mu'minina fil jannah, arwahul mu'minina fil jannah, wa arwahul kuffari fil nar. Where are the souls? There's the souls of the believers are in Jannah and the souls of the kuffar in the fire. Wa abdanu fi dunya, wal abdanu fi dunya yu'adhibu Allah man yasha. And this is interesting. The bodies are in the world, and Allah punish whoever wants. Wa yarham man yasha minha bi'afwi. Allah forgives and has mercy on the souls in this dunya from it whoever He wants. Right? So meaning that it's not whoever He wants to forgive, whoever wants to punish from the bodies. The souls are in Jannah, the souls are in the fire. But the bodies in dunya, and from some of them He will punish, some of them He will reward as well, the bodies. And then it mentioned, there's a discussion mentioning about almost to the end, regarding the body. How does it feel when the soul is somewhere else and the body is somewhere else? He gives many examples of in what we consider inanimate objects. For example, the nutq al-dhira' al-masmum, the the shoulder of the goat that was presented to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is poisoned, which told Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that it's poisoned, and this is what affected him, and at the end of his life the effect of it showed as well. The Yahudi lady who killed, and some Sahaba radiallahu anhum died from it, and then later it affected, before Rasulullah passed away, the effects of that appears on Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She poisoned, because that was the favorite part, the shoulder of the goat, roasted goat, like this was a favorite, like and they say that in Tib al-Nabawi is mentioned, this is the asra'u lil hadam, like it's the most quickest digests easily and so forth, but it's very tender. And so Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, she knew that was Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's favorite part, so she put poison in it. So that shoulder that was present, it's told Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam it's poisoned. And then it mentions, he comes back to the original hadith of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, the people, the Quraysh, the bearers of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, addressing them, and how Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that you cannot hear better than what they can hear. And he said that their hearing, فَدَلَّ عَلَى أَنَّ السِّمَامُ حَسَلَ عَلى الْسَادِ لَا أَرْوَاحْ فِيهَا, that this is, that it indicates that it was a body. It indicates what? That there's bodies with no souls in it that they can hear. And so then he comes to what is the body and what is hearing, and he gives further examples. So he said just because the soul is separate doesn't mean he cannot. فَلَا يَمْنُ مِثْلَ ذَلِكَ فِي جَسْدِ ابْنِ آدَمَ بَعْدَ مَفَارِ الرُّوحِ. Even the ruh is separated from the body, it does not mean we cannot say that he cannot hear. And he gives finally about example of the Day of Judgment, when the limbs will speak, skin will speak, people's limbs will talk. All right, and he mentioned that the soul will argue with the ruh, they're two separate things. So then comes the discussion. There's a book Ibn Qayyim Rahimahullah wrote, Ar-Ruh, Kitab Ruh, statistic on what the soul is. You get, it gives you, and you look all the views, you start reading what's nafs, right? That's why on a simple level we believe that insan, the real insan is the ruh, and what we have is nafs, is when the ruh is connected to the body, then we call this nafs. This is a simple definition, but there's like 20 views when you read through all the Imam's views and all the Imams what they view, because these things are speculative. Yes, we accept the ruh, believe, because it's in the Quran. We exist because we look at each other, we exist, we have reality. But what is the reality of the ruh? It is the amr of Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, if they ask you about the ruh, say it's the amr of Allah. So, but there is a speculation, the ulama, the researchers, they will look into this and they will try to understand this. And he gives many examples, inanimate, what we consider inanimate, but then they're speaking, or the stones that spoke, or the tree that spoke, what we call inanimate objects, and those things came to life and they spoke. So what kind of life do they have? So then the question comes in the reality of what is life. Heavy subject to get our head around. But the point being is that there is actually, in modern time, there are debates about this. And in our part, I'll say this because those are Pakistani, they probably heard about hayatis and mamatis. You probably heard this argument in Pakistan. Hayatis, obviously the ones who believe the mainstream one. Then there's Mamatis. There's no, the person is dead in the grave. It's got nothing to do with this world. They cannot hear us. But the argument is one thing. The academic argument has always existed. But there in Pakistan, maybe it's Pakistan, what we eat, and I don't know. It became sectarian, an extreme version of it, to the point of even almost to takfir. In Urdu we say shagird ustaz se aage badh. The student goes ahead of his teacher. Goes beyond the teacher. Teacher spoke only about this much. The students go even more. Take it even more further. They go the extra mile. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala save us from those things, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make our what the reality is, we'll find out. All of us are going to find out one day. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make our graves a garden from the gardens of paradise and not a pit from the pits of hell. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.